I'm Chuck Todd. I have a Meet the Press Take Two Web Extra today. I've got former Republican Congressman Tom Davis and NBC News senior political analyst David Axelrod here. We're making Mr. Axelrod work a little bit harder now that you're on the payroll. So we at the NBC News political unit did something that only a political geek will love. We put together a Senate madness, if you will, consequential senators of all time to try to get people to vote, and people are still in the midst of voting. Who was the most consequential senator in U.S. history? We ranked them. We seeded them. We have one seeds. People like LBJ, Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, Ted Kennedy were our one seeds. We have different brackets. We have a 19th century bracket. We have a modern day bracket, 20th century bracket, and a mixed bracket.
The only harder thing would be the least consequential senator.
Well, and that was not easy. We had a whole tournament selection committee, if you will. We went to historians, and then, of course, we decided on our own who got in and who got out. Tom Davis, you looked at our bracket. You had some issues with it. Tell me some issues you had.
I think Mike Mansfield should be a top seed.
He's a former Senate Majority Leader for some 30 odd years in the Senate.
30 years as Senate, 16 years as Majority Leader. But you take a look at all the civil rights legislation. He was the leader during that time in a very divided caucus. Those days, you got to remember, you had a chunk of Democrats, about 21 Democrats voting no on everything. So he broke the filibuster. He did have LBJ as president during that time.
Right. He had the president, Senate Majority Leader, is right. What the argument was, and that's why, frankly, and it was my argument to move him down. We made him. Hey, look, he made the list. 64 out of thousands of senators. That's pretty good. But we put him down because LBJ was Senate Majority Leader even as president. Was he not, David?
Well, he certainly moved a lot of that legislation. The Cairo book, the most recent one, speaks to that. But I think Mansfield was a facilitator in a very difficult environment. You have Barry Goldwater here as a number 3.
Too high.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you were rating people for their impact on national politics, he would rate high because he sort of set the conservative movement in motion. But his influence within the Senate, I think, is lower than.
Well, and it's interesting. That was sort of one of the debates we had with some of our historian friends on this, Tom, right? Which this issue, and you were a Senate page, so you have a little bit of an advantage here on Axelrod because you're an obsessive Senate historian when it comes to these things. But was the case of how impactful were they to national politics versus? So we didn't put Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama in, but we did put Joe Biden in. Because Joe Biden had a lengthy, influential career in the United States Senate.
Committee chairman and the like.
Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton weren't there long enough to be.
Or Bobby Kennedy, for that matter. I mean, there were people who were very consequential in national politics who weren't as consequential in the Senate. JFK himself was sort of a backbencher.
Yeah.
Warren Harding.
Yeah, not on our list for things like this. So how did we do in our number 1 seats? We had Henry Clay, Daniel Webster. Those were no-brainers, right?
Yes.
Two most powerful senators in the 19th century.
The Profiles in Courage book. You know, they're sitting there right there in the Senate. They have their pictures right there in the reception room.
Yeah.
Of being they're 2 of the 5 greatest senators. So that's a done deal.
And LBJ as the other 1 seed. You almost have to, right?
I think so.
He restored the power of the Senate, when he was the Majority Leader.
So the debate we had was between Ted Kennedy and Everett Dirksen. Maybe Everett Dirksen, the most powerful Senate Minority Leader from your now adopted home state of Illinois.
Yes. But I mean, I'm partial in this regard. I think Ted Kennedy was the most influential senator of his generation when you consider the sweep of things that he worked on over the course of nearly half a century and his unique ability as a progressive to work across party lines. I never forget a story that the president told me about standing on the floor with Ted Kennedy Kennedy asked for his vote on a bill that seemed doomed. And it was St. Patrick's Day. Yeah. Bill came up, 60 votes, approved. He's standing there with Ted Kennedy, looks at him in amazement, says, "How'd you do that?" Kennedy just pats him on the shoulder and says, "Luck of the Irish."
Well, it's funny, and a lot of people think if Ted Kennedy had been there active, you'd have gotten health care on your timeline. We didn't include any current senator.
Plug in for Dirksen. I mean, Dirksen, great bipartisan. Bay of Pigs, yes. Called members to the White House. He's in a tough race with Sid Yates for re-election in 1962. Dirksen gets called to the White House. Civil rights never would have passed if Everett Dirksen had not been the leader.
Look, I'm an Illinoisan.
And there's a building named after him, so obviously
he's
a lot of people.
He's got the building.
Yes,
and so
many politicians have gone down in the Dirksen building. So, but I think that Dirksen was incredibly important in the 60s in terms of bringing along Republicans on some of these key bills. But it also was easier to bring Republicans along in the 60s than it is now, was it not?
Let's talk about the current Senate.
Parties were actually, they're much more ideologically sorted today than they were
then.
But that's what I'm saying.
And everything else. And
that's what I'm saying.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
So. You had two different Democratic parties. I didn't include anybody who's currently sitting in the Senate. But look at these guys. Who are the ones? We only had one woman on our list, Margaret Chase Smith. Barbara Mikulski, does she end up one day, and somebody's putting together the most consequential 50 or 100 senators, is she going to be on that list? Chuck Schumer, John McCain?
Well, actually, in fairness, Schumer has become quite a figure because he's active in so many different areas out front under his Judiciary Committee perch. Mikulski, very good senator from Maryland, but she is all Maryland, and she will live and die for Maryland.
But the question is, did she open the door? I mean, Ed Brooke is on here and should be on here because he opened the door. She opened the door. How far in the bracket she would go, I don't know, but she certainly is a historic figure.
Who's a lion in there in the Senate? Who's a lion to be besides Schumer? Because I'm with you. Schumer seems to have become this replacing Ted Kennedy as sort of the guy that finds a way to find a Republican to come on board something.
I mean, look, not to evade your question. The question is there room? Are there room for lions in the Senate anymore, given the ideological nature of our politics? It is, it is very hard to traverse those those divides the way Kennedy did and others did. So
let me throw a couple.
Let me offer up two.
Corker.
Interesting.
Portman.
Let me throw out two more. Lindsey Graham, Michael Bennet.
Well, I think both those guys have those impulses. The question is not. And I respect everyone who you guys name. The question isn't whether you have the impulses. The question is, can you achieve it?
Correct.
And that, I think, that's what history needs to see, is can they fight through these considerable barriers and actually get things done as Kennedy and some of these others did.
Are Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell going to go down in history in a positive light as leaders of their respective parties?
They're at a time of a lot of gridlock at this point. I think that's a tough bar for them to get over.
I think part of it will be judged by how some of these major initiatives like healthcare reform turn out, because you would argue that we wouldn't have had that. But
if it's a positive, then it enhances and all that. All right, this was fun. Thanks for geeking out with me, guys.
Okay, all right.
That's it for this Meet the Press Take 2. Thank you, Betsy, for letting me do it.